Madam Speaker, or rather former Madam Speaker, forgive me, but could you state the year you first assumed the role of Speaker of the House? The voice was unhurried and soft, possessing that Louisiana cadence that turned every statement into a front porch chat instead of a Senate inquisition. Senator John Kennedy reclined in his seat, with reading spectacles balanced on his nose tip, regarding Nancy Pelosi, like a tolerant grandfather waiting for a toddler to recall a basic fact. Silence filled the room, but not the quiet of a person carefully weighing an answer, nor the pause of someone estimating political fallout. It was a hollow silence, the quiet of fumbling for information that should be readily available, yet remains out of reach. Nancy Pelosi occupied the witness chair in the Judiciary Committee room, positioned between two attorneys wearing high-priced suits. She gazed at Senator Kennedy as though he had just requested she perform complex calculus mentally. Her mouth parted slightly, then shut only to open once more. C-SPAN cameras remained focused tight on her expression, while every cable news channel had cut away to broadcast this live. This oversight hearing regarding congressional stock trading and ethical breaches had initially seemed like typical Washington performative art when first scheduled. However, something about Pelosi's current appearance, specifically the vacancy in her eyes and the faint confusion furrowing her brow, signaled to the audience that this event would unfold differently. 10 seconds ticked by, then 15, making the silence grow increasingly awkward. That was the moment we reclaimed the House majority from the Republicans, after she began trailing off, searching and grasping, like one tries to recall a login code typed thousands of times. Suddenly, when the moment is critical, the information simply vanishes. Kennedy's tone stayed gentle and nearly benevolent. 2007. Ma'am, you became Speaker in January of that year, exactly 17 years prior. Do you recall that fact? Pelosi's complexion reddened ever so slightly, and she insisted naturally she remembered explaining she was merely thinking. What year did you ascend to the Speaker position for the second term? He asked, following another pause. This silence stretched longer, causing her attorneys to shift uneasily in their chairs. One lawyer leaned in to whisper a prompt, but Kennedy raised a palm to stop him, stating he preferred Mrs. Pelosi answer from her own recollection, if possible. The attorney retreated, and Pelosi stared down at the mahogany table before her. 2019. I believe the year was 2019. Yes, ma'am. It was indeed 2019. And you held the gavel until January of this current year, when the new Congress took their oaths. Is that correct? So you served as Speaker of the House on 2 separate occasions, for a cumulative total of roughly 12 years, holding one of the most potent offices in the American government, placing you third in the line of succession. You possessed access to top-secret intelligence briefings voted on war powers and controlled exactly which bills reached the floor. So, do you remember that era? Well, certainly I do, she replied, as Kennedy lifted a document from the pile arranged before him. Excellent. Then you will surely recall the stock transactions, so let me inquire about those specific events. He fixed his glasses and glanced down at the paper reading March 15, 2020. That was a Sunday occurring right in the midst of the initial COVID panic. And do you remember that specific day? Silence followed his question, and he repeated, Ma'am, do you recall March 15, 2020? Pelosi spoke quietly, acknowledging she remembered it was during the COVID crisis. Yes, on that particular day, you and your husband, Paul, bought $5 million worth of call options for Pfizer stock. These were call options that would yield profit only if Pfizer's share price rose, so do you recall that transaction? More silence ensued before he asked Mrs. Pelosi, do you remember buying $5 million in Pfizer options? My husband takes care of our portfolio, and I do not involve myself in daily operations, she stated, but Kennedy noted she signed the financial disclosure form. Kennedy displayed a document asking if the signature at the bottom belonged to her. He held the paper aloft, ensuring the cameras could capture the image clearly while her signature appeared sharply on the projection screen behind her. Pelosi gazed at the image with absolutely no spark of recognition in her eyes. She examined her own autograph as if it were the handwriting of a complete stranger. "Do you recall signing this specific form, ma'am? Because I signed numerous documents," she replied. This particular form disclosed a $5 million trade executed the day prior to the House voting on the CARES Act. That was the initial massive COVID relief package worth $2 trillion, and you were Speaker leading those negotiations. The day before the vote, your family invested $5 million in a pharmaceutical firm poised to benefit immensely from pandemic response funds, yet you do not remember that. She offered no response, and Kennedy leaned forward slightly. His voice remained soft, retaining that gentle drawl, but it now carried a new element of genuine concern. "Mrs. Pelosi, do you know what day falls on the calendar today?" She looked up at him, then toward her attorneys, and finally back at Kennedy, while everyone watching, including senators, staffers, and millions on television, witnessed the same reality in her expression. She did not know, and she genuinely had no idea what day it was. Her attorney leaned in close and whispered into her ear, causing her to nod faintly. "Thursday," she finally said, prompting Kennedy to quietly remark that her lawyer had just provided that answer. "Did you actually know it was Thursday before he informed you?" Followed by a long and terrible silence. "What is the date, ma'am?" he asked, leading to another pause where she looked completely lost. "January 22nd, her lawyer whispered, and Pelosi repeated, "January 22nd. Kennedy reclined in his chair, appearing sorrowful as he spoke. "Mrs. Pelosi, I am compelled to ask if you are currently under the care of a physician for memory issues." That was the moment every viewer understood what this hearing was truly about. It was not merely about stock trades, but about whether Nancy Pelosi, one of the most potent politicians in American history, had been making decisions impacting hundreds of millions of people while her memory was actively disintegrating. The silence ensuing after that question lingered for 20 seconds, though it felt like 20 years. She did not answer because she could not answer, and in that instant, 50 years of political dominance concluded not with a corruption scandal or a vote, but with a simple query about the date. 4 hours prior to this, the scene had been drastically different. It was Thursday morning, January 22, 2026, in room 216 of the Senate Hart Office Building. The Senate Judiciary Committee room was teeming with journalists, staffers, and cameras filling the space. The formal ambiance, created by dark wood paneling and brass fixtures, lent a heavy seriousness to the proceedings. This was the arena where careers met their end, where scandals were laid bare, and where history was written. The hearing had been convened following a ProPublica investigation released 3 weeks prior, which exposed a pattern of stock trading by Congress members that appeared suspiciously well-timed. The headline had been condemning accusing lawmakers of making millions from inside information unavailable to the general public. Nancy Pelosi's trades were highlighted prominently, with charts aligning her husband's transactions against major legislation and classified briefings. The pattern was impossible to overlook, involving buying pharmaceutical stocks right before pandemic funding, and tech stocks before bills benefiting tech firms while selling defense stocks prior to negative news about military contracts. This occurred repeatedly, resulting in a total profit of $140 million during her speakership, despite a congressional salary of only $2,350 annually. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted to hold hearings subpoenaing Nancy Pelosi to testify under oath. She was no longer Speaker, as Republicans had captured the House in the 2024 elections, but she remained a sitting member of Congress, leaving her no choice but to appear. At 9:45 in the morning, she arrived being 85 years old, although she would never admit to that age. She had served in Congress for 38 years and held the speakership twice for a cumulative dozen years. She had stared down presidents, survived numerous scandals, and wielded power with an iron grip, all while wrapped in designer suits and costly jewelry. She entered the room flanked by attorneys from a prestigious D.C. firm, both carrying leather briefcases, likely costing more than most Americans earned in a month. Her chief of staff followed along with two communications staffers, whose task was to spin whatever occurred today into a survivable narrative. Pelosi wore a perfectly tailored purple suit and removed her signature oversized sunglasses upon entering, revealing a face that had seen more Botox than most Beverly Hills residents. Her hair was styled meticulously, and her pearl necklace with diamond earrings likely cost 6 figures. She appeared imperious and untouchable, looking like she had done this 1,000 times before, and would do it 1,000 times again. However, what she did not look was worried, which was her primary mistake. She took her place at the witness table while her lawyers sat on either side arranging papers and whispering to project confidence. This was just another hearing where she would answer vaguely, run out the clock, and return to the office to fundraise off Republican attacks as per the standard playbook. What Nancy Pelosi and her lawyers did not know was that John Kennedy had spent 3 weeks preparing specifically for this moment. He had focused not just on the damning stock trades, but on something else entirely different. 3 weeks prior, in Kennedy's office, within the Russell Senate office building, his chief of staff had entered, carrying a thick folder. "Sir, you requested I gather everything regarding Pelosi's public appearances for the past 3 years, the staffer said. John Kennedy looked up from the budget document he was reading, appearing younger, fit, and sharp, despite being 73 years old. His folksy Louisiana drawl and humble demeanor often caused people to underestimate him, which was exactly how he preferred it. His resume told a different story, featuring a Vanderbilt undergraduate degree, a University of Virginia law degree, and an Oxford scholarship. He had clerked for a federal judge, practiced law for 2 decades, served as state treasurer for 8 years, and then entered the Senate. He was not what he seemed and never had been, so he asked what had been found. His chief of staff dropped the 3-inch thick folder onto the desk, explaining it contained video transcripts and interview clips with concerning parts flagged. Kennedy opened it and began reading, and within 5 minutes he was taking notes. An interview from June 2024 on MSNBC showed Pelosi referring to President Trump as President Bush 3 times before staff corrected her. During a speech at a fundraiser in August 2024, she repeated the exact same sentence 4 times in 90 seconds, word for word, like a skipping record. In a September 2024 press conference, she confused the name of her own committee assignment, calling the Appropriations Committee the Apportionments Committee. A deposition in a civil case from December 2024 showed the transcript recording her answering that she did not recall or remember 76 times in 4 hours. Kennedy looked up, stating, "This is more than just old age," and his chief of staff nodded, agreeing the pattern was worsening. Comparing early 2023 to late 2024 showed the decline was accelerating, though no one had raised it publicly aside from Twitter speculation. Mainstream media refused to touch the topic because she remained too powerful and connected. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, remaining quiet for a long moment before ordering the staffer to pull all her financial disclosures. He wanted every stock trade her husband made while she was Speaker, requesting dates, amounts, and cross-references with classified briefings and committee votes. "You think the stock trading is connected to the cognitive issues?" the staffer asked. I think if she cannot remember what year she became Speaker, she cannot remember signing off on $5 million trades. Kennedy replied, this means someone else was making those decisions using her access, while she was too impaired to notice or care. His chief of staff whistled low, remarking that it was a serious allegation. It is not an allegation, but a question, Kennedy corrected, stating he would ask it in public on live television to watch her try to answer. They spent 2 weeks building the narrative case, showing a pattern of stock trades perfectly timed to classified information. These were followed by contradictory public statements, depositions, where she remembered nothing, and interviews where she seemed confused about basic facts. By the time they finished, Kennedy possessed a 30-page binder, where everything was documented, sourced, and part of the public record. He was not going to ambush her with secret information, but rather ask her to remember things she should know and watch her fail. Now, at 10:00 a.m. on January 22nd, the hearing was called to order, and the chairman brought the room to silence. The chairman read through the formalities, stating the purpose of the hearing, the rules, and the witness list. Nancy Pelosi was the main attraction, though others like former SEC officials and ethics experts would follow later. The chairman recognized the ranking member for an opening statement, a Democrat from California, who naturally spent 5 minutes defending Pelosi. He called the hearing a partisan witch hunt, claiming the stock trades were fully legal and disclosed as required. Then a Republican senator gave a statement attacking her, saying the American people were tired of representatives getting rich off insider information while working families struggled. This was standard partisan theater, with Democrats defending and Republicans attacking, ensuring nobody's mind would change. Then it was Kennedy's turn, and he stood up slowly, shuffling some papers, intentionally, to seem disorganized and harmless. People always underestimated the slow-talking Southern lawyer until it was too late. Mr. Chairman, I do not have a long speech prepared. I just want to ask the witness some questions to get facts on the record. He turned to look at Pelosi, who looked back with an expression she had perfected over decades, appearing slightly condescending, as if he were wasting her time. Kennedy smiled slightly, saying, Madam Speaker, "Oh, I apologize. You are not Speaker anymore, are you? What should I call you?" Pelosi's voice was clipped as she said, "Congresswoman is fine." "Thank you, Congresswoman, I appreciate your time today," he said, sitting down and arranging his papers carefully. He took a sip of water, using calculated slowness to build tension and make people wait. Now, I want to ask you about some stock trades. But first, just so we have a clear timeline for the record, can you tell me when you first became a member of Congress? It was a simple question of basic fact that should be automatic, and Pelosi said, I was first elected in 1987. Thank you, and when did you become Speaker of the House, he asked, and that was where the trouble started. That simple question of what year she became Speaker caused Pelosi to pause, not for long, maybe 2 seconds, but that was too long for an automatic answer. That was when we took back the House from the Republicans after the Bush years, she said, searching, while everyone could see her eyes had that distant look of someone trying to remember something, just out of reach. Kennedy waited without helping or interrupting until she finally said, 2007, though there was uncertainty in her voice. Yes, Ma'am, Kennedy said gently, January 2007, and you served as Speaker until 2011, when Republicans took the majority in the Tea Party wave. Then you were Minority Leader for 8 years and became Speaker again in 2019, after Democrats took back the House. Is that timeline correct? She said, yes. So you were Speaker for 4 years, then Minority Leader for 8 years, then Speaker again for 6 years until this January. That is about 18 years in leadership with 12 as Speaker, meaning you were one of the most powerful people in government. You had access to classified briefings controlled the legislative agenda and were third in line for the presidency. So do you remember that time clearly? Of course I do, she replied. So Kennedy picked up a document saying, "Good. Let us talk about some decisions you made during that time." Kennedy adjusted his reading glasses, stating, "Mrs. Pelosi, I want to establish that your memory of your time in leadership is clear and accurate. I am going to ask you some basic questions involving facts, dates, and names that any speaker would remember. Is that all right?" Pelosi nodded, and he asked who was president when she first became speaker in 2007, to which she correctly answered George W. Bush. And who was vice president, he asked, and after a slight pause she said, "Cheney, Dick Cheney. Yes, ma'am." Now, when you became speaker the second time in 2019, who was president? "Donald Trump," she answered, and he asked who was vice president, which required a longer pause this time. "Pence, Mike Pence," she finally said, which was correct. "Now, who is the current president of the United States?" he asked, which should have been an instant answer, since everyone in America knew Trump had been inaugurated 2 days ago. It had been wall-to-wall coverage. Yet Pelosi opened her mouth and started to say, "President Biden," before catching herself. President Trump, was just inaugurated, she corrected. But Kennedy noted she had started to say Biden. President Biden served from 2021 to 2025. One term. Then Trump won the election and was inaugurated Monday. "You seem uncertain about that," he noted, asking why, and she claimed she misspoke because it had been a transition period. "Ma'am, it has been 2 days since the inauguration, and you initially said Biden was president, which concerns me. If you are unclear on who the current president is, I have to question whether your memory of events from 2020 to 2022 is reliable." One of the Democratic senators jumped in protesting, "Mr. Chairman, this is absurd. Everyone misspeaks." Kennedy turned to him, stating, "Senator, with respect, this isn't a casual conversation, as Mrs. Pelosi is under oath testifying about financial decisions she made while Speaker. If she cannot clearly remember who was president 2 days ago versus 2 years ago, how can we trust her memory of specific stock trades and classified briefings?" He turned back to Pelosi, asking who is the current Senate Majority Leader, but silence followed, and Pelosi's face showed confusion. "Ma'am, who leads the Senate right now?" he asked, and she guessed Schumer. "No, is it McConnell?" looking genuinely uncertain. "I don't recall," she started. So he told her it is Chuck Schumer and has been since 2021, which is 4 years. "You have worked with him on major legislation, and you do not remember that." "I know it is Schumer. I just hesitated," she said. But Kennedy pointed out she guessed McConnell first. Mitch McConnell has not been Majority Leader in 4 years, so why would you think it was him? She had no answer. Kennedy let the silence hang, then asked Mrs. Pelosi, "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to take a break?" "I am in," she said so. Kennedy continued pulling out a thick document representing her financial disclosure forms from 2019 to 2024. 6 years of required reporting. "I want to ask you about specific trades," he said, flipping to a flagged page. "March 15th, 2020. Do you remember that date?" She said she did not recall specific dates without context. "Let me help you." March 15th. 2020 was a Sunday, and the COVID pandemic had just been declared a national emergency. The country was shutting down. The stock market had crashed and people were panicking. So do you remember that time period? "Of course, COVID was happening." She said so. He continued, noting on that Sunday, March 15th, you and your husband purchased $5 million in call options for Pfizer stock. Do you remember that trade? Silence followed, and she said, "Mrs. Pelosi, my husband manages our investments. I am not involved in the day-to-day. But you signed the disclosure form, and by law you have to disclose any trade over $1,000 within 45 days. This was $5 million, and your signature is on the form, he said, holding it up as cameras zoomed in. Her signature was clearly visible, yet she stared at it with no recognition in her eyes, like looking at a stranger's writing. "Do you remember signing this?" he asked, and she said, "I sign a lot of documents." This one disclosed a $5 million trade, the largest single trade you made all year, and you do not remember signing it. "I trust my staff to prepare accurate disclosures," she said. So he asked if her staff knew about the trade, prepared the form, and she signed it without reviewing it. "I review everything, but I do not memorize," she claimed, so he asked if she remembered the trade, yes or no. "I remember my husband makes investments," she said, but Kennedy insisted that was not what he asked. "Do you remember this specific trade of $5 million in Pfizer call options on March 15, 2020? He asked. And after a longer pause, she admitted she did not recall the specific details. Kennedy leaned forward, explaining, "Here is why that is a problem. Because the next day, Monday, March 16th, the House voted on the CARES Act. This was the first major COVID relief bill worth $2 trillion, including $10 billion specifically for vaccine development. You were Speaker, led the negotiations, and knew what was in the bill. Yet the day before the vote, your family bet $5 million that Pfizer would see its stock price increase." He paused, noting that is either the luckiest coincidence in investment history or it is insider trading, but you do not remember it. Which raises the question, if you do not remember a $5 million trade made the day before a major vote, what else do you not remember? Pelosi's lawyers were whispering to each other frantically, and one leaned over to her, but Kennedy held up a hand. "Let her answer, please," he said, and the lawyer sat back, as Pelosi looked at Kennedy, claiming the trade was based on publicly available information. "You mention your husband's investment advisors, but you do not remember the trade itself, so you cannot tell me why March 15th, or why Pfizer specifically, or why $5 million. You just know it happened, because your lawyer showed you the disclosure form," he said, pulling out another document. "Let us try another one, June 18th, 2021. "Do you remember that date?" she said. "No." "On June 18th, 2021, your husband purchased $2.5 million in Microsoft stock, and 5 days later, on June 23rd, the House passed a bill authorizing $52 billion for semiconductor manufacturing. Microsoft stood to benefit enormously from that bill. So, do you remember that trade?" And she said she did not remember every transaction. "How about this one?" Kennedy asked relentlessly, noting December 3rd, 2021. "Your husband bought $3 million in Tesla call options. 2 weeks later, the House passed an expanded electric vehicle tax credit that added $7,500 to the purchase price of a Tesla, making them more affordable. This drove demand and increased the stock price. So does that ring any bells?" Pelosi's face was flushed as she said, "Senator, I do not coordinate my legislative work with my husband's investments. I am not asking if you coordinate, I am asking if you remember, because these are multi-million-dollar trades happening right before major votes. These trades made your family enormous profits, and you are telling me you do not remember any of them." "My husband handles the investments," she repeated, but Kennedy countered that she signed the disclosures and her name is on the forms. Kennedy held up a stack of them, showing dozens of trades worth tens of millions of dollars, all perfectly timed, and she claimed she did not remember any of it. Kennedy pulled out his phone, saying, "Let us talk about some statements you have made recently. Last month, January 4th, you did an interview with CNN about this stock trading controversy. Do you remember that interview?" "I do many interviews," she said. So he clarified, "This was 3 weeks ago with Jake Tapper, where you were asked directly about the stock trades." Let me show you what you said, he noted, tapping his phone, so a video played on the screen behind Pelosi. Her own voice filled the room stating, "I have never, ever used my position to benefit financially. My husband makes his own investment decisions, and I am proud of his success." Kennedy paused the video, asking if she stood by that statement, and she said yes. Okay, now, 3 days later, January 7th, you did an interview with MSNBC where Nicole Wallace asked you about the same topic. So let me show you that one. Another video clip played where she said, "Look, maybe some of the trades look bad in hindsight, and maybe we should have been more careful about timing, but there was no intentional coordination." Kennedy paused it and asked if she saw the problem, but Pelosi looked confused, saying she did not. On January 4th, you said you never used your position to benefit financially, but 3 days later, you said maybe you should have been more careful about timing. Those are contradictory statements, meaning either you did something wrong and should have been more careful, or you did nothing wrong at all, so which is it? Those statements are not contradictory, she argued, saying she was trying to explain the nuance. Ma'am, they are 3 days apart and you gave 2 different answers to the same question in the same week. Why? Pelosi opened her mouth, closed it, and said she was trying to explain, but Kennedy interrupted to show her more, pulling out printed transcripts. January 10th, you told a reporter from Fox News, quote, "I do not recall the specific trades my husband made," end quote. That is a direct quote. Do you remember saying that she replied, "If that is what the transcript says"? But then, on January 12th, you told Politico, quote, "Those trades were made on sound financial advice from experienced professionals," end quote. So which is it? You do not recall the trades, or you know they were based on sound advice because you cannot defend trades as being sound if you do not recall them. There was silence and no answer, so Kennedy leaned back, stating, "Mrs. Pelosi, in the past month alone, you have given contradictory statements about the same topic to different media. You cannot keep your story straight from one interview to the next, combined with your inability to remember basic facts like the Senate Majority Leader." "I am genuinely concerned about your memory," he said, pulling out a bound document that was thick, maybe 200 pages. "Mrs. Pelosi, 3 weeks ago you were deposed as part of a civil lawsuit related to these stock trades, which was a shareholder lawsuit. You were deposed under oath for 4 hours. Do you remember that deposition?" She said, "Yes." "Good. Do you remember how many times you answered, 'I do not recall' or 'I do not remember' during that deposition?" Silence followed, and you do not remember how many times you said, "You do not remember." Kennedy, let the irony hang. Let me tell you, 76 times in 4 hours you claimed you didn't remember something, which is 76 times. He opened the transcript saying, "Let me read you some of the questions you couldn't remember the answers to." On page 23, the question was, "Do you remember discussing the CARES Act with your husband in March 2020? And your answer was, "I do not recall." He flipped pages to page 47, where the question was, "Do you remember when you first learned about your husband's purchase of Pfizer options?" And your answer was, "I do not recall." More pages followed, such as page 68, regarding signing the financial disclosure form for the Microsoft purchase, where she answered, "I do not recall." On page 91, regarding attending a classified briefing on semiconductor supply chains before the CHIPS Act vote, your answer was, "I do not recall." Kennedy looked up, stating, "Mrs. Pelosi, these are not trivial questions, but major events involving classified briefings only a handful of people access. You do not remember multi-million-dollar trades or signature legislation causing her lawyer to jump in, stating senator depositions are adversarial proceedings, and lawyers advise witnesses to be careful. I understand how depositions work, counselor, having taken hundreds of them, but there is a difference between being careful and having no memory. Here is the real problem," Kennedy said, flipping to another section. Noting on page 47, you were asked if you discuss investment strategies with your husband. Your answer was, "No, my husband handles all of our investments independently," he said, flipping forward. But on page 103, you were asked, did you ever talk with your husband about market trends? And you answered, occasionally, we discuss general economic trends like any married couple. He looked up asking, so which is it? You do not discuss investments at all. Or you occasionally discuss economic trends, because economic trends inform investment strategies. Those answers contradict each other, and they are from the same deposition 50 pages apart, causing Pelosi to look flustered. I was trying to distinguish between specific trades and general conversations, she said, but Kennedy noted she could not remember either. You said I don't recall 76 times, so you cannot remember the conversations, but you also cannot consistently describe whether the conversations happened. Kennedy's voice softened, becoming almost kind, which somehow made the situation worse. Mrs. Pelosi, I am going to be direct with you because I think you deserve directness, and the American people deserve the truth. In the past month, you have given contradictory public statements and been unable to remember basic facts about current events. In your deposition, you claimed not to remember anything 76 times, and today, you struggled to remember when you became Speaker or who leads the Senate. He paused, stating, I am concerned about your memory and cognitive function, so I need to ask, have you been evaluated by a doctor for any kind of cognitive impairment? Her lawyer immediately objected, saying, that is a medical question inappropriate for this forum, but Kennedy insisted it was directly relevant. Kennedy said quietly but firmly, if Mrs. Pelosi was making legislative decisions while experiencing cognitive decline, the American people have a right to know. If she was signing off on stock trades worth millions without full awareness of what she was signing, that is relevant to whether those trades were made with her knowledge. He turned back to Pelosi, saying, Ma'am, I am not trying to embarrass you. I am trying to understand how these trades happened. Here is what I see. Either you made these trades knowingly using your position for personal gain, or you did not make them knowingly because you were not cognitively capable. Either way, you shouldn't have been in leadership, and the room fell completely silent. So I will ask again, have you been evaluated for cognitive impairment? And Pelosi's hands were shaking slightly as she claimed to be completely competent. Then, answer my questions, Kennedy said, asking what was the date of the Pfizer trade, followed by silence. What year did you become Speaker the first time, he asked, and she was searching again, but could not find the answer. What did you have for breakfast this morning, he asked, and after a long pause, she genuinely could not remember. What day of the week is it, he asked, and her lawyer whispered, Thursday. Thursday? She repeated, so Kennedy noted your lawyer just told you that. But did you know it before he told you? And there was no answer. Mrs. Pelosi, what is today's date? She looked panicked and lost until her lawyer whispered, January 22nd. January 22nd, she said, and Kennedy sat back looking genuinely sad. Mr. Chairman, I move that we request a formal cognitive evaluation of the witness before proceeding further with this investigation. The Democratic senators erupted, shouting, This is outrageous! You are attacking a woman based on her age, and this is sexist ageism. But Kennedy was not backing down, stating, Mr. Chairman, this woman had access to our nation's most sensitive intelligence for 12 years. She voted on authorizations for military force, controlled trillion-dollar budgets, and was third in line for the presidency. And she is sitting here today, unable to remember basic facts about her own career, unable to tell us what day it is without her lawyer whispering it. If there is cognitive impairment, and I believe the evidence shows there is, the American people have a right to know. A Republican senator piled on, saying the trades speak for themselves with $140 million in gains over 12 years. showing perfect timing again and again. Either she is lying about not remembering, or she is genuinely impaired. But either way, she had no business being Speaker. Another Republican added, if she was cognitively impaired while making these trades, that means someone else was using her position for financial gain. That is fraud, corruption, and potentially criminal, causing the chairman to try to restore order, calling for gentlemen to please stop. Mr. Chairman Kennedy said, I am not attacking Mrs. Pelosi. I am trying to get to the truth. And the truth is, she cannot answer basic questions. She cannot remember her own statements from 3 weeks ago, and cannot tell us what day it is without help, which is not partisan, but observable fact. He turned back to Pelosi, stating, Ma'am, I am going to ask you one more time, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you remember making these stock trades? Long silence followed as she stared at the table. Do you remember the classified briefings that preceded these trades, her hands shaking visibly now? Do you know where you are right now? She looked up at him, and in her eyes, for just a moment, there was clarity. A flash of the woman who dominated Congress for decades appeared, and in that flash she knew what he was doing, and knew it was over. But then the blankness returned, bringing back the confusion and the searching. I am in the Senate. This is a Senate hearing room. Yes, she said quietly. Do you know why you are here? Stock trading, she said quietly, so he asked if she remembered the trades, and silence followed. Her chief of staff rushed forward from the audience, seating, leaned down to whisper urgently in her ear, while the camera caught the panic in his face and confusion in hers. Pelosi stood suddenly, saying, I do not have to sit here and be attacked with conspiracy theories. Ma'am, these are not conspiracy theories, but your financial disclosures, your deposition transcript, and your public statements all documented public records. I am just asking you to remember them. But she said, I am done with this hearing, gathering her things. With hands shaking so badly, she dropped her phone. One of her lawyers picked it up, while the chairman stood saying, Mrs. Pelosi, you are still under subpoena and cannot just leave. But she was already moving, and her lawyers had to support her by the elbows because she looked unsteady and confused regarding her direction. Kennedy called after her, with his voice still that calm Louisiana drawl, Mrs. Pelosi, if you leave, we will have no choice but to refer this matter to the Department of Justice. We will call for a criminal investigation into the trades and refer the question of your cognitive capacity to the House Ethics Committee. She stopped at the door, turned for a moment, and the old Nancy Pelosi was there, imperious, defiant, and powerful, saying, Do what you have to do, Senator. And she left the door closing behind her while cameras caught the confused look on her face and the way her staff had to guide her. The lawyer carried her briefcase, and the chief of staff was on his phone, likely calling the communications team to start damage control. The hearing room erupted with senators, shouting reporters, yelling questions, and camera flashes going off, while Kennedy sat calmly organizing his papers into neat stacks. The footage was everywhere within minutes on every cable network news website. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram showing not the full hearing, but the devastating clips. Clips showed the question, what year did you become Speaker? Followed by a long, confused pause. And who is the Senate Majority Leader, where she guessed McConnell? What is today's date, where the lawyer had to whisper the answer, and do you remember these trades, followed by a blank stare? The most viral clip was 23 seconds long, showing Kennedy asking gently, Mrs. Pelosi, what day of the week is it? It showed her looking lost, her lawyer whispering Thursday, and her repeating Thursday like a child reciting a lesson. That clip got 40 million views in 6 hours, and medical experts were on cable news within an hour, including neurologists and geriatric specialists. Experts said those are classic signs of significant cognitive impairment citing the blank stares, the inability to retrieve basic information, and the contradictory statements as very concerning. The fact that she needed prompting for the day of the week suggests more than just normal aging. Even Democrats started hedging, not defending her exactly, but not attacking Kennedy either, stating if there are health concerns, Mrs. Pelosi should prioritize her well-being. The stock trading allegations are separate from any cognitive issues, but both deserve investigation, and we should be careful about medical diagnoses, but the questions are legitimate. By Friday morning, Pelosi's office released a statement that was brief and carefully worded. Congresswoman Pelosi is taking a temporary leave from her congressional duties to undergo a comprehensive medical evaluation, remaining committed to serving her constituents. Translation: they knew it was over. And on Monday, the Justice Department announced a formal investigation into the stock trades. This was not because of the hearing itself, but because now there was evidence she might not have been mentally competent when she authorized the trades. If she was not competent, someone else was making decisions using her position and access, which constituted fraud and corruption. Paul Pelosi, her husband, was subpoenaed to testify, and his lawyer announced he would invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, which was answer enough. On Wednesday, 3 House Democrats, who had been Pelosi's closest allies for decades, called for her resignation not because of corruption, but health. We love Nancy. She is a giant in American politics and a trailblazer. But if she is experiencing cognitive difficulties, she needs to focus on her health. The polls came Friday and were devastating, showing 71% of voters believed Pelosi should resign, including 54% of Democrats. Furthermore, 63% believed she had engaged in insider trading, and 58% believed her cognitive decline meant she never should have been Speaker during her second term. But the killer question was whether people believed Nancy Pelosi knowingly made the stock trades in question. Yes, said 44%, while no said 37%, and unsure was 19%, which was the problem, because combined with no, it meant 56% thought she was either unaware or unsure. Either she was corrupt or she was impaired, but either way, she was unfit. So 10 days after the hearing, Nancy Pelosi announced her resignation. Not just from leadership, but from her seat, the statement released on a Friday afternoon, using the classic news dump timing. She did not appear on camera holding no press conference, just issuing a written statement saying, after 38 years of service, I have decided to retire. I am proud of my accomplishments from the Affordable Care Act to marriage equality, and I leave, knowing I fought for working families. I thank the people of San Francisco for the honor of representing them and look forward to spending time with my family and grandchildren. She did not mention the stock trades, the hearing, or Kennedy, just a vague mention of health, a list of accomplishments, and a dignified exit. 3 months later, the Justice Department charged Paul Pelosi with securities fraud and insider trading, totaling 27 counts, corresponding to trades made near classified briefings. He pleaded guilty, and part of the plea deal was that Nancy would not be charged because prosecutors decided she genuinely had not been aware of what she was signing. That was almost worse than being charged, implying she was too impaired to prosecute and too far gone to be held responsible. Paul got 18 months in federal prison and a $10 million fine, serving 14 months at a minimum security facility in California. Nancy Pelosi disappeared from public life, doing no interviews, making no statements, and letting her Twitter account go silent. Her last tweet was the resignation announcement, but occasionally there were sightings such as TMZ getting photos of her being helped into a car outside a medical facility. She looked small, frail, and confused, nothing like the woman who had wielded a gavel and controlled the House of Representatives. John Kennedy gave one interview after her resignation to a reporter from the Baton Rouge Advocate, a local Louisiana paper. "Did you feel bad?" the reporter asked, exposing her like that on national television, and Kennedy was quiet for a moment before saying, "I felt bad for the country. We had someone in a position of immense power, third in line for the presidency, who could not remember what day of the week it was. She was signing documents she had no memory of signing and making decisions affecting hundreds of millions while her mind was failing." "But did you feel bad for her personally?" "Of course I did, because I would not wish cognitive decline on anyone, as it is cruel and robs you of yourself. But here is the thing. It is not her fault that her memory was failing, because that is age and disease which happens to people. What is someone's fault is the system that kept her in power even as everyone around her could see she was declining. Her staff knew, her colleagues knew, leadership knew, and they kept her there because she was useful and could raise money as a symbol. I did not end Nancy Pelosi's career to be cruel. I did it because the American people deserve to know the person making decisions is capable. That is not partisan. That is just accountability," Kennedy said, and the reporter asked one more question. "Do you think the stock trades were corrupt?" Kennedy smiled slightly, saying, "I think someone was making very profitable trades using information that only Nancy Pelosi and a handful of others had access to. Whether that someone was her husband, her staff, or Nancy herself, before her decline accelerated, I do not know, so the courts will sort that out. What I know is this: you cannot serve in Congress if you cannot remember what Congress is voting on. And for the last 2 years, she could not remember." A year after her resignation, Nancy Pelosi was moved to a memory care facility in San Francisco, and the family released a brief statement requesting privacy. She was 86 years old, had been in Congress for 38 years, served as Speaker for 12 years, and had been one of the most powerful women in history. In the end, it was not a political opponent scandal or election loss that brought her down, but a simple question from a soft-spoken senator. What day of the week is it? She could not answer, and that told everyone everything they needed to know. The lesson, if there was one, was this: power does not care about your legacy or what you accomplished or who you helped. Power demands competence, and the moment you cannot provide that competence, power moves on. Nancy Pelosi's power had moved on. She had been left behind, unable to even remember it was ever hers.